History remembers Cleopatra VII, the seductress of Rome. But before her, there was another Cleopatra, one more cunning, more ruthless, more violated, and her empire, built not on charm but blood, betrayal, and incest. This is the story of Cleopatra Thea, a princess sold like property, a queen crowned in poison, and a mother whose ambition led to her own son's dagger. You won't hear this in school textbooks. If this is your first time here at Historian Bunker, hit that subscribe button, like this video, share with your friends and family, and comment where you're watching from, because you're about to witness a tale darker than any royal scandal you've ever heard. Let's dive into the deadly game of Cleopatra Thea. She was born into chaos. Cleopatra Thea's cradle rocked to the sounds of swords clashing and kings dying. Her mother was a queen. Her father, Ptolemy VI of Egypt, descendant of Alexander's generals, ruled a land as unstable as it was wealthy. From birth, Cleopatra Thea wasn't seen as a child, but a bargaining chip. Her name meant goddess, but to those around her, she was a ticket to power, a living treaty, a future mother of kings to be manipulated. As a teenager, she was sent to the Seleucid Empire not for love, but to secure peace between Egypt and its age-old enemy, Syria. She was to marry Alexander Ballas, the current king, a man of charm, but shallow roots. Alexander Ballas wasn't a true Seleucid. He was a pretender, a pretty face paraded by Rome and Egypt to keep Syria dancing on strings. His claim, questionable. His reign, fragile. Cleopatra Thea, his political life raft. The wedding was dazzling, gold flowed like water. But beneath the luxury lay rot. Cleopatra Thea was a virgin queen gifted to a fraud. The world called it diplomacy. She called it her first sacrifice. As queen, she smiled, sat beside him, bore his child. But Alexander was not loyal. He drank too much, gambled away allies, and hosted orgies more than councils. She watched it all, silently sharpening her mind like a blade. Her father, Ptolemy VI, soon regretted the alliance. Disgusted by Alexander's failures, he switched sides. He betrayed his son-in-law and gave his own daughter to a new suitor, Alexander's rival, Demetrius II. Cleopatra Thea was forced to abandon one husband and marry another. But not just any man. Demetrius II was her cousin and far more dangerous than the last. He was colder, sharper, obsessed with restoring Seleucid glory. To him, Cleopatra wasn't a wife. She was a tool, and soon, a prisoner. Their wedding wasn't union, it was conquest. This wasn't just cousin marriage. It was state-sanctioned incest, wrapped in royal ceremony. And for Cleopatra, it was rape masked as dynastic duty. Her screams silenced behind golden palace doors. Demetrius paraded her as his queen. But privately, he kept her close only to bind Egypt's loyalty. He invaded Judea, burned cities, slaughtered rivals. And Cleopatra, she was expected to smile through it all. She bore him children, sons, who'd one day fight over her blood like lions over a carcass. But Cleopatra Thea wasn't broken. She was learning, observing, calculating. She had survived to kings. Now she would learn how to control one. And when the moment came, she would strike with a precision no man expected from a woman raised as bait. But fate twisted once more. Demetrius was captured during a campaign, dragged off by Parthians and presumed dead. Cleopatra was left in Antioch alone, vulnerable, and ripe for conquest. Her palace swarmed with vultures. Generals, advisors, even her own in-laws, all eyed the throne. And once again, Cleopatra Thea was told she'd marry to protect the dynasty. This time, it was Demetrius' brother Antiochus VII, another cousin. Another forced wedding, another chapter of abuse cloaked in ceremony. Antiochus was a warrior, stronger than Demetrius, more disciplined. But still, a man raised to use women as keys to power. Cleopatra gave him heirs, and silently, she began to poison her soul. Behind her painted face and regal posture lay layers of trauma, raped, remarried, passed from cousin to cousin like royal currency. But Cleopatra wasn't done yet. She had plans for her sons. She would raise them not just to rule but to be weapons. Her womb had birthed kings, and now she would choose which one deserved her crown and which one deserved her dagger. Antiochus VII died in battle, just like his brother. And for the first time, Cleopatra Thea stood alone on the chessboard with no king beside her, but she no longer needed one. She had learned every deadly rule of dynastic politics, and now she was ready to break them. Because soon, she wouldn't be a queen consort. She would be queen regnant. And heaven help the son who thought he could rule without her. But first, she had to eliminate the competition, including the sons she once cradled. And that, dear viewer, is where the game turns deadly. The throne was now hers to control, but her hands were not free. They were stained with trauma, vengeance, and bloodlines so tangled even she could barely track them. And in her arms, sons born of men she despised. Cleopatra Thea had given birth to royal heirs, but that didn't mean she wanted to share power with them. In the Seleucid world, motherhood was not a bond. It was a battlefield, and her children, rivals in waiting. Her oldest son, Seleucus V, had the strongest claim. He was tall, sharp, confident to confident. The moment he began issuing orders, Cleopatra felt her power slipping. So, she did what no mother should. She killed him, poisoned wine, a quiet dinner, a soft smile. One moment, Seleucus was alive. The next, his mouth foamed, his limbs jerked, and Cleopatra watched expressionless as her son died before dessert. No tears, no mourning, just a silent lesson to the younger one. Don't challenge your mother's crown, unless you're ready to die for it. Next came Antiochus VIII, a teenager, cautious, traumatized. He had seen what happened to his brother. He didn't argue. He let Cleopatra rule as co-regent, smiling in public, trembling in private. The court whispered. Some said she'd become a mad woman. Others, a goddess of vengeance. But all agreed, Cleopatra Thea was no longer anyone's pawn. She had become a player. Behind the palace walls, she pulled the strings. Appointed governors, forged alliances, executed rivals. Anyone who dared oppose her met the same fate as her eldest son, a quick, cold death with a motherly smile. And yet, power is never absolute. Outside Antioch, enemies stirred. Rebels, generals, and forgotten princes with fragments of royal blood began calling themselves rightful kings. Cleopatra responded with iron. Her armies crushed revolts. Her assassins silenced dissent. She even ordered temples built in her name, clearly not content to be queen alone. She wanted divinity, but the throne of the Seleucid Empire was built on a fault line. Every step she took shook the ground beneath her. Every alliance created a new enemy. And her biggest threat lived under her roof. Antiochus VIII was growing, taller, smarter, resentful. He watched his mother poison his brother. He listened to whispers of her past, of how she'd been passed from man to man, then decided she'd never be used again. He knew she saw him as a threat, not a son. He also knew that, if he didn't act first, he'd be the next victim of one of her infamous dinner feasts. So he plotted, quietly, patiently. He built support in secret: noblemen, generals, palace guards. While Cleopatra ruled by fear, Antiochus learned to rule by charm. One evening, during a banquet meant to celebrate a minor military victory, Cleopatra raised her goblet. A golden chalice, glimmering under torchlight, she toasted to the empire. Antiochus raised his own, smiled, and watched as her eyes widened. She dropped the cup, clutched her chest, gasped. The poison had been hers to use. But this time, it had found her instead. Accounts vary. Some say she was poisoned, others that she committed suicide after realizing Antiochus had outmaneuvered her. But what matters is this: Cleopatra Thea, queen, mother, and murderer, was dead. She died not surrounded by enemies, but by her own legacy. A son who had inherited her ruthlessness, a kingdom teetering on collapse, and a reputation so stained, Not even the sands of time could cleanse it. But her death was not the end of her story. In fact, it was only the beginning of her myth. After her burial, rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed she survived and ruled from the shadows. Others said her spirit cursed the Seleucid bloodline forever, dooming every heir to madness or murder. Even Antiochus VIII, now ruling alone, could not escape her shadow. His reign would be long but plagued with rebellion, betrayal, and bitter reminders of the woman who had shaped him like clay on a potter's wheel. He married a woman just like his mother, ruthless, political. He named one of his daughters Cleopatra, as if to either honor or exorcise the ghost that haunted his every decision. But deep down, he knew, no matter how long he ruled, he would never escape the story of the boy who watched his mother kill his brother and struck first to survive. Cleopatra Thea's legacy wasn't in temples or statues. It was in scars carved into her sons, etched into her court, and echoed in the fall of one of history's most fractured empires. And what of the empire itself, the Seleucid realm that once stretched from Turkey to Iran? It shattered within a generation. It would crumble into dust, ravaged by civil war, Roman interference, and the very poison Cleopatra once used as a tool of diplomacy. The queen who rose through blood and seduction had left behind only ruin, but she had done what no woman before her had dared to do in the East: rule in her own right, kill for her crown, and choose which sons were worthy of her legacy. Her life was not a tragedy. It was a challenge to the world that created her. And whether she was villain, victim, or visionary, one thing remained certain. Cleopatra Thea played the deadliest game, and for a while, she won. Powerful women in history are rarely remembered fairly. Cleopatra Thea was no exception. Male scribes labeled her wicked, a harlot, a traitor to her sons. But if a man had done what she did, they would have called him a genius. Let's be honest, Cleopatra Thea didn't just survive. She outplayed them all. She manipulated kings, outlived husbands, controlled thrones, and even decided which of her children got to live. If that's not power, what is? But her story isn't unique. In fact, it's part of a grim pattern across ancient dynasties: incest, forced marriage, rape disguised as diplomacy, and queens turned into pawns or monsters. The Seleucid dynasty she ruled was already crumbling before she arrived. Founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals, it was plagued with brothers killing brothers, uncles marrying nieces, and cousins stabbing cousins at coronations. Incest wasn't scandal, it was policy. Inbreeding kept power pure. Cleopatra Thea was born into this tradition. Her body was royal real estate, passed like land deeds. But she flipped the game board. Instead of being owned, she owned others. Instead of being silenced, she used silence as a weapon. She smiled while planning murders. She ruled with honey on her tongue and venom in her goblet. Yet history punished her for surviving. Roman writers called her unnatural. Syrian chroniclers feared her name. Later historians brushed her off as a footnote to the men she married. But Cleopatra Thea didn't just support kings, she replaced them. She challenged the most sacred ideal of the time: that women should rule only through their wombs, never their will. And in doing so, she shattered an empire from the inside out. Let's not forget, this wasn't a woman raised in freedom. She was trained from birth to be traded like livestock. Her first marriage wasn't romantic, it was a strategy by her father. Her second marriage, a betrayal by her father. Her third marriage, to a man who used her as bait for legitimacy. Every step of her life was chosen for her until she chose to take power back. And that power, it came at a cost. The cost was humanity, love, family, sanity. You don't survive 3 cousin marriages and to dead husbands without becoming something colder than steel. She didn't just lose sons, she chose to lose them. That's not cruelty, that's calculation. You see, Cleopatra Thea had no room for motherly affection. Empires don't reward sentiment, they reward survival. And her legacy proves that in ancient politics, the most dangerous creature in the palace was a mother with ambition. Still, we must ask, was Cleopatra Thea evil? Or was she simply a reflection of the evil system she was forced to master? Because the world she lived in didn't make space for mercy. It devoured the weak. It turned women into currency and children into threats. Cleopatra didn't invent that game, she just learned how to win it. And even when she died, she left chaos behind that echoed for decades. Her sons, poisoned by both her womb and her will, would war until the Seleucid Empire became a broken map of scattered cities, unforgotten heirs. Even Rome looked at the Seleucids and said, "Too messy to fix." But while her empire died, her story lived on, twisted, vilified, and then buried under the more palatable myths of submissive queens and noble widows. Because history prefers its women soft, dead, or quiet, Cleopatra Thea was none of those things. She was sharp, she was alive, and she was loud even in silence. We can see her echoes in every ruthless queen that came after her. Wuzian of China, Ranavellona of Madagascar, Catherine de' Medici, women who ruled through blood and outlived the kings who thought them ornaments. Even Cleopatra VII, the more famous one, used similar tactics, weaponizing beauty, aligning with powerful men, and betraying family for political leverage. But Thea did it first and without the Roman romance subplot. What makes Cleopatra Thea's story so chilling is that her worst crimes, poisoning her own son, assassinating rivals, manipulating empires, weren't committed in shadow. They were done under torchlight, with witnesses, and no apology. She didn't hide. She didn't plead. She didn't even blink. And maybe that's what makes her terrifying. Because while male tyrants are often excused as brilliant, troubled, or misunderstood, women like Cleopatra Thea are simply labeled monsters, yet her reign, as bloody as it was, brought temporary stability. She kept civil war at bay. She protected Seleucid prestige for a while. And she carved a path for female power, a world built to erase women. But here's the real question: if you were born into her world, with her fate, with her choices, would you have done any differently? Would you marry your cousin to avoid war? Would you kill your son to keep your crown? Would you swallow your trauma and weaponize your pain to rule? Or would you become a corpse on someone else's game board? Cleopatra Thea chose to be a queen, not a victim. And in doing so, she ensured that her story would be impossible to forget even if history tried its hardest to bury her. So when we talk about female tyrants, let's remember, behind every dagger-wielding queen was a world that taught her blood is the only currency that matters. Cleopatra Thea just learned how to print it. An empire doesn't collapse overnight. It decays one mind at a time. And in the Seleucid world, where incest was diplomacy and betrayal was routine, the first thing to rot was the soul. Let's be blunt. These people were broken before they ever sat on a throne. From birth, Seleucid rurals were told they were divine, that their blood made them gods. That marriage wasn't about love, it was about keeping power locked in the family, like treasure in a tomb. And that treasure came at a price. Incest rewires generations. It doesn't just bend family trees, it breaks them. Cousins marrying cousins, uncles marrying nieces. Sometimes, brother to sister. The royal bedroom wasn't a sanctuary. It was a political weapon. Psychologists today call this dynastic trauma. Generations of children raised by paranoid, power-hungry parents. Fathers killing sons, sons poisoning mothers. Children watching relatives slaughter each other at banquets. And Cleopatra Thea, she was raised in the middle of it. But instead of breaking, she adapted, became a product of dysfunction, and then passed it on. That's what made her reign so tragic, because she didn't end the cycle. She became its most terrifying expression. Think of the damage done to her sons. Raised by a mother who killed one of them, ruled over the other, and trained them to trust no one, not even family. What kind of king does that create? A monster or a mirror? Antiochus VIII, her surviving son, never trusted another human being. How could he? His bedtime stories were full of poison goblets and fratricide. His role model was a mother who saw love as weakness. He ruled with suspicion, married strategically, exiled his own children, and when rivals rose up, he didn't hesitate to slaughter them even as they shared his last name. That's the curse Cleopatra left behind. Not empire, not glory, but fear. Deep, hereditary fear, baked into the bloodline like a disease. And the empire felt it. The Seleucid realm, once vast, began splitting into shards. Local governors turned into warlords. Former allies turned against each other. Everyone claimed royal blood. Everyone wanted the throne. But they had no idea how to rule, only how to survive, just like their queen mother. And that survival instinct, it devoured the future. Even the Romans, who had once respected the Seleucids as rivals, began referring to them as mad Greeks or degenerate kings. They saw the incest, the fratricide, the endless cycle of poison coronations. Rome didn't conquer the Seleucids with legions. They conquered them with time, waiting patiently as the dynasty rotted from within. And it's no coincidence that Cleopatra Thea's name disappears from records shortly before that final decline. Her death wasn't just a turning point, it was a warning. A warning that when you build an empire on pain, it doesn't fade away peacefully, it explodes. We see similar patterns in other inbred dynasties, the Habsburgs of Spain, whose jaws grew too long for them to eat. The Ptolemies of Egypt, whose incest became so extreme that madness was inherited like wealth. And what links them all? The belief that power must stay in the bloodline even if that blood turns toxic. Cleopatra Thea didn't invent that belief, but she enforced it with unmatched precision. Her legacy wasn't just royal, it was psychological warfare, passed down through bedrooms, betrayals, and broken sons. Modern historians hesitate to call her mad. She wasn't. She was something worse, clear-eyed, methodical, a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and did it anyway. Because in her world, madness was a luxury, survival required calculation. But what happens when an entire family thinks like that? The answer is collapse, collapse disguised as continuity. Kingdoms that crown children, marriages that are strategic rapes, queens who smile as they kill their own. By the time the Seleucid Empire finally crumbled, nobody mourned it. Not the people, not the priests, not even Rome. It had become a cautionary tale, a nightmare with a crown, and at the center of that nightmare, a queen whose face still haunts ancient frescoes and whose name still echoes in the bones of failed dynasties. Cleopatra Thea wasn't just a political figure. She was a psychological event, and that's why her story matters, because empires don't just rise and fall, they pass on trauma like heirlooms. And long after the palaces burn, the damage lingers in the children, in the culture, and in the way power is feared. She proved that women can be tyrants, that motherhood doesn't cancel ambition, that survival can be a form of violence, but she also left a terrifying question hanging in the smoke of her empire. What if every powerful family eventually becomes her? Cleopatra Thea's name should be in every textbook right beside Cleopatra VII, Nefertiti, and Boudica. But instead, she's mostly a footnote, a caution, a whisper, buried beneath centuries of male-written history. Why? Because she was terrifying, not because she ruled, not because she killed, but because she ruled and killed with no apology. No seduction, no softening, no love story to hide behind. Just raw, calculated dominance. History likes its women powerful, but only if they're tragic, or sexy, or both. Cleopatra Thea was neither. She wasn't seduced by Rome. She didn't die for love. She didn't cry when she poisoned her own son. She rewrote the rules, then got erased from the board. The few ancient sources that mention her do so in passing, as if her reign was incidental, as if her murders were glitches, as if her survival wasn't a masterclass in strategy. Even modern historians struggle to categorize her. Was she a villain, a victim, a mother, a queen? The truth is, she was all of them and none. She was complicated, and history punishes complexity in women. So she was redacted, but her story survives in fragments. In marble busts with eerily stoic eyes, in dusty scrolls where her name is mentioned once, then skipped, in dynastic charts where she connects 3 lines of royal blood, and when you put the pieces together, you get a woman who reshaped an empire through sheer force of will. A woman who took the abuse handed to her and sharpened it into a crown. We must remember her not to glorify her, but to confront the systems that created her. Cleopatra Thea's story forces us to ask hard questions. About power, about gender, about trauma and legacy. About how far someone should go to survive and when survival becomes tyranny. In her time, she was feared. After her death, she was rewritten. Today, she's being rediscovered. And maybe that's the point, because her story isn't just ancient, it's eternal. Every time a woman is told to smile while suffering, every time she's traded for peace, every time she must choose between being loved and being respected, Cleopatra Thea rises from the ashes. She is the patron saint of the broken woman who refuses to stay broken. But she's also a warning. Power, once wielded without empathy, becomes a poison. And sometimes, those who have been violated learn to violate others in return. Her legacy is both empowering and terrifying, and that's what makes it necessary. For too long, we've been fed sanitized versions of queens, noble widows, tragic beauties, helpless consorts. But the truth, some queens were monsters, and some monsters were made not born. Cleopatra Thea is the dark mirror we rarely want to look into. But when we do, we see a woman stripped of choice who clawed back control. A mother who murdered, a wife who outlived kings, a pawn who became a player. She may have been forgotten by the mainstream but not by us. Because here, at Historian Bunker, we tell the stories they tried to erase. We shine a torch into the darkest corners of history. And in that flickering flame, you'll see her, sitting on a blood-stained throne, chalice in hand, eyes cold, lips smiling. A queen no one could tame, a woman no one could trust, a name no one should forget. If this story shook you, if it made you think, if it peeled back the layers of what history hides like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Historian Bunker for more untold truths just like this. And let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Because the stories of the most dangerous queens in history are just getting started.